Thank you, Leanne, and welcome back, everyone. I hope you feel as I do that the past 2.5 hours, I guess, or so of our forum have really been amazing and thought-provoking and challenging our ideas on what each of us can do in our spheres of influence. We've had incredible speakers, we've had wonderful discussion points raised by you in the audience, and we've had the video and our panelists who in our communities, how we might address them, how to heal from them, and to understand the challenges faced by immigrants and the many benefits that they bring to our society. I'd like to take this opportunity for a moment as chair of the Board of S.U.C.C.E.S.S to express our gratitude to all of you, our audience, our speakers, our sponsors, for taking this afternoon to join us at the forum. By being here, you are indicating you are willing to join together in safeguarding our communities, upholding our shared values around immigration, multiculturalism, tolerance, and inclusion. I certainly wish to thank Peter Goh and the Advocacy and Community Relations Committee and Queenie Chu and Amy Cheng and other staff from S.U.C.C.E.S.S who put in so many hours in shaping and putting together this forum. I now have the great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Artur, Canada's ambassador to Norway. In December, when we were just talking about putting on a forum, we found out that Ambassador Wilczynski would be in Vancouver in February, and we quickly realized he would be a perfect keynote speaker for us. It was actually the first piece that we put in place for this forum. Ambassador Wilczynski has had a highly successful 25-year career in the federal public sector. At Public Safety Canada, he served as Director General of International Affairs and Border Policy, and also as Director General of Strategic Policy, Planning and Research. He led discussions with U.S. Department of Homeland Security that resulted in the Beyond the Border Declaration by then Prime Minister Artur and then President Obama. At the Department of Canadian Heritage, Artur was chair of the Organization of American States Inter-American Committee on Culture and chair of the Working Group on Globalization at the International Network on Cultural Policy. Artur was named Knight of the Order of Arts and Letters by the Government of France for his work on cultural diversity. In 2010, he joined the then Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, first as the Departmental Security Officer responsible for the security of Canadian missions abroad. Following that, he was Director General of International Security and Intelligence Bureau with responsibilities in terrorism, combating transnational organized crime, human smuggling, and international defense relations. This covered work with international organizations such as NATO, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. In 2014, Artur Wilczynski was named Canadian Ambassador to Norway. On the embassy website, it indicates our work is about people and partnerships, and it means cooperating to make the world safer, more secure, more respectful of human rights, and a better place for all. And I think that aligns so well with our aspirations for this forum. Ambassador Wilczynski.
Thank you very, very much, Grace. I really very much appreciate it, and I really want to thank all of you who are here today to participate in this important forum by S.U.C.C.E.S.S. And I really do think that we need to acknowledge the young persons who have spent 2.5 hours here. You ask the question whether or not these voices are heard, they have to be heard. Because we're doing this, and we're trying to build a future that, quite frankly, you will be happy with, and that is a legacy for all of us. So thank you for being here today. Chief Joseph, Senator Wu, distinguished panelists and colleagues, I very much appreciate being here on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And thank you very much for that warm introduction. It is indeed an honor for me to be here at UBC, Robertson Square, for this important community forum. We are here today because we believe it is important to stand together to combat xenophobia and racial discrimination. We are here because we share a fundamental belief that inclusion, fairness, respect, and equality are human values that Canadians share. I'm grateful to be back in Vancouver. I can't quite call this my hometown. Canadian diplomats really have a problem calling anything a hometown. While I live in Norway now, I've lived for 30 years in Ottawa. I grew up in Montreal. But what I can say is that my parents live here in Steveston. My brother and his family live in Deep Cove. I've got cousins who live in Vancouver as well. So let me just say that I have a deep personal connection to British Columbia. That's why hearing about some of the recent incidents targeting newcomers, in particular targeting the Chinese community here in the Lower Mainland, has been so disappointing. In fact, one of my major concerns is that the global dialogue on diversity is coarsening. Whether in Europe or North America, whether through ignorance or malevolence, this coarsened dialogue on diversity is, in my view, a contributor to hate, exclusion, and violence. I'm here today because I believe it is an individual responsibility, an obligation, to speak in support of inclusion, accommodation, and respect. It is our obligation to not cede the public space to voices of discrimination. All of us have a voice. We have a voice to speak out against depressingly frequent racist incidents happening around us. Listening to the panel discussions earlier today, for me, was a privilege. All the participants brought forward key messages about racism or the immigrant experience in Canada, about our shared values, and our determination to continue our work for a Canada that is more welcoming, more respectful, and more inclusive. These are values that I share. These are values that are worth defending. These are powerful voices and messages that are important to hear. So I know many of you are wondering, who is this guy in front of you and why is he here? Quite frankly, when I was approached, and I think I've asked about 17 times, are you really sure you want me to speak about this? Because, I mean, let's face it, I'm a white, cisgender man, and I'm an ambassador. I am someone who benefits from immense privilege in our society, and I need to acknowledge that as I take the floor here and speak on these issues. But I'm also someone who has a story, and I think it's important to share our stories as well. I have a journey that brought us together here today. So let me introduce myself. My name is Artur, and I am Canada's ambassador to Norway. I have represented our country in Europe for 2 years. As a Canadian diplomat in Europe, one of my key responsibilities is to help people get to know us better. Norwegians often say to me, I really love Canada. I really, really like it. But I don't know why. As a diplomat, that is a good place to start. Positive feelings about our country. But I really need to start with the basics. I tell Norwegians that Canada is big. It's 10 million square kilometers, the second largest country in the world after Russia. I show them this map and try to explain our federation and its political context. I then show them this. And what that is a map of Norway superimposed. It's not that, I didn't spill anything. It's a map of Norway superimposed at latitude and to scale. And the reaction from most Norwegians is the same as yours. They kind of laugh, they feel uncomfortable. But I don't show this to show any kind of power thing. I show this to talk about some of the political, demographic, geographic challenges of living in and governing such an immense country. I tell them that Canada has physically much in common with Norway. The Arctic, mountains, oceans, polar bears, and moose I mean, when you go to the airports in Oslo, you feel exactly the same as when you go to the airport here in Vancouver or Montreal or Toronto, with the exception of maple syrup. You have the stuffed polar bears, you've got the stuffed moose, and it's the same iconography that you have. But what distinguishes Canada from other countries is our people, who we are and how we came to be in this huge land on the top of the Americas. I tell Norwegians about the first inhabitants of Canada, the indigenous peoples of this country, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I speak of French and British colonists who came to this country and created the conditions for its creation and its eventual bilingual character. I tell Norwegians how over hundreds of years these peoples were joined by others from all over the world to make our country one of the most inclusive and diverse societies you will find anywhere. I then try to complete the story. I know it's a risk. I know that as a diplomat, many in my audience expect me to paint that stereotypical picture of an exclusively happy, multicultural Canada, one that has solved the riddle of racism and integration, and has effectively tackled all of the challenges of living in a diverse society. That's what a lot of Europeans want to hear. I can't, and I won't do that. It's not true, nor does it help advance Canadian interests and objectives around the world. I tell Norwegians about the history of residential schools and the devastating and lingering impact this history has on Indigenous peoples in Canada and the festering wound it has left for all Canadians. I speak about the thousands of murdered and missing Indigenous women and how we are still struggling to come to terms and address this horrific legacy. I tell Norwegians how so many Canadian Indigenous people are still seeking justice. I talk about the experience of Chinese immigrants who came to Canada to build a future, a railway, and our country, only to face the exclusionary and racist head tax. I tell them about the story of the Komagata Maru and the St. Louis, two ships that sailed for freedom, only to be met with bigotry and hate. They left Canadians with phrases such as, "None is too many." I tell Norwegians about the internment of Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. I feel it is my obligation to tell people that while we are a welcoming society, with millions of citizens who have joined us from every corner of the world, over 200,000 every year, I tell them that discrimination, racism, and xenophobia are still the lived experience of many, and that we struggle as a country to confront these threats to our security, to our prosperity, and our cohesion. I say these things not to show that Canada is weak or Canada is bad. I share these things because I believe that it is by being honest about your history, by being clear-eyed and truthful about your present, that you can build a respectful and inclusive country for all of your citizens. This is Canada's strength. This is what makes our country great, that we strive to be better, each generation trying to be better than the last. Too often today, countries try to paint themselves in an exclusively positive light. Some of my fellow diplomats gloss over the legacies their countries are facing because of the inconvenient facts of history. Some desire to paint alternative facts to the realities of their countries because they justify actions that would otherwise not withstand scrutiny. When I finish speaking with my Norwegian friends, I know they still have that positive feeling about Canada. They understand us better. They understand why diversity is important to us, why we consider it an integral part of our past and such a key part of our future. They understand that nurturing a diverse, pluralist, multilingual society takes effort, that mistakes are made continually, but that through dialogue and engagement, we can strive to be a better country. People in Europe are also intrigued by my personal story. They see my name and it still does not conform to their stereotypes of what it means to be Canadian. So why am I telling you this? Because I'm a newcomer to Canada too. Though people don't ask me where I'm from. just to point that out. I was forced to leave the country of my birth with my parents and find a new place, a new home. I was born 50 years ago, good Lord, 50 years ago in central Poland. My family were both victims of the Nazi Holocaust, the mass murder of 6 million European Jews, and also some of its survivors. My grandmothers both managed to cross the border from German Nazi side of occupied Poland to the Soviet side in the earliest part of the war. They survived because they managed to escape. They were refugees. They found their refuge in the Ural Mountains on the eastern fringes of Europe. While my mother and father survived, their cousins, their sister, their grandparents, my maternal grandfather, all died in the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust. It is difficult to overstate the effect this had on my family and my community. My grandparents survived the war because they perceived the Soviet Union had saved their lives. That perception gave them a level of dedication and support for that country precisely because it gave them refuge. My family were forced to move a second time, this time after I was born. In 1968, the communist government of Poland, in response to the 1967 Arab-Israeli war and domestic politics, launched an anti-Semitic campaign against what was left of the Jewish community in Poland. This was a community that was over 3 million strong in 1939, but barely 35,000 in 1968. My family left because of institutionalized anti-Semitism, a loss of jobs and opportunities. They were afraid for my future. They traveled from Czechoslovakia and Austria before they arrived in Italy. We waited for 3 months in Italy, no passports, and stripped of our Polish citizenship. We were stateless persons in Europe. At the time, my parents had the choice to immigrate to Israel. It was one of the few places that would take us, but my father didn't want us to go there. We were lucky. We were sponsored to come to Canada by relatives who had arrived here before the Second World War. And I do want to acknowledge the presence here of granddaughters of the family that sponsored us. So from the bottom of my heart, we will always be grateful to you, so thank you. A key reason why they sponsored my family was because of me. Because I was a kid who had nowhere else to go, and because they wanted to make sure that I had a future. We left Europe by ship, arriving in Halifax at Pier 21. We moved to Montreal in Quebec, where my family settled and integrated into the city, together with thousands of immigrants from around the world. I remind Norwegians that refugees in Europe are nothing new. In fact, over the past 100 years, millions of Europeans have been forced to flee war, conflict, persecution, poverty. This included hundreds of thousands of Norwegians. Next to Ireland, Norway had the highest percentage of its population emigrate to the United States and Canada to find better opportunities for them and their families. Many of the Jews who left Poland in the late 60s ended up in Canada and the United States. We were welcomed into societies that provided for us, helped us and our families succeed, helped shape us into the people who wanted to give back. We were determined to be as open and generous with the country that had welcomed us as the country had been upon our arrival. I can't overstate the type of loyalty and love you have for a country and a people when you know that they saved your and your family's lives. I was very fortunate. My parents made a decision early on when they arrived in Canada that they would focus on my education. They put me in a private school with an international reputation. My parents were both professionals. My mom was a biochemist and a cancer researcher, and my dad an engineer who worked in the forestry and paper and pulp industry. Like for most immigrants, education was central for them, and they enrolled me in excellent schools. But I have to say that school was difficult for me, because I still know, that I was different. Since my earliest memory, I've known that I was gay. It made for a challenging childhood, being the immigrant, being the outsider. Nowhere felt safe at that time. I couldn't be me because of what I thought I needed to do to please other people, to please my parents, to please my friends, my teachers, my friends. This was also the 1980s, a time when the HIV/AIDS epidemic was ravaging the gay community in North America. It made life difficult and honestly made it scary. But what all of this experience showed me was the importance of diversity. It instilled in me the importance of personal resilience. I didn't and wouldn't fit into anyone else's predetermined box. For me, it was absolutely important to define my own identity, to shape it, before someone else could define it for me in a way that I didn't like. I am part of a diverse culture and identity where I can change and grow. I'm not My identity is not stagnant, it changes. This is who I am. I'm Polish, I'm a gay man, I'm Jewish, I'm a Quebecer, and I'm an immigrant. All of this means that I'm Canadian. Personal identity is complicated. One is never one thing. My country has given me remarkable opportunities. In many countries, being any one of the things that defines me would have been a deal breaker in terms of government service. In the 1960s and 70s, it would have been unthinkable, at least very, very peculiar, for a first-generation immigrant for the Soviet bloc to become a senior official in the security and intelligence community. A gay man was considered a national security threat. Many were persecuted, if not prosecuted, for their identity. I am remarkably thankful that this has not been my Canadian experience. Canada has embraced me and my family. This country has given us everything. We are supported by friends, families, schools, healthcare facilities, and governments to succeed. We're able to thrive in a country that has adopted us. I've represented my country in various forums. I've worked on culture and on sport. I've worked on border policy and on immigration. My work has taken me everywhere from China to Afghanistan to all over Africa, Colombia, and the Middle East. I've worked on counterterrorism at a time when it was a key global issue. I've been able to move between fantastic jobs that have given me a great breadth and diversity of experiences. It is because of this privilege that I believe it is important to speak out. We should never take for granted the progress we have made. We need to be vigilant that the inclusive society we have built together continues to broaden that table of inclusion. As an ambassador in Europe, I have seen the rise of xenophobia and discrimination. I have seen fear of difference used to broaden gaps between people, and this has a real impact. I have visited refugee claimants in Norway who were fleeing from the wars and strife that have torn apart countries in the Middle East. I have listened to the fears of women with young children trying to understand what will happen to them as countries across the continent respond to the migration crisis that thousands, the hundreds of thousands of people who are trying to find a better life for themselves. One sees and hears the Islamophobic rhetoric almost every day. I've also visited the Jewish Community Center in Oslo that is unlike any that I have seen. The street that it is on is blocked to traffic. It is behind bollards, guards, and bulletproof glass. When I speak with young Jewish Norwegians, they tell me how difficult it is to be out as Jewish, how they lose friends if they find out they are Jewish. And the Jewish community in Norway is about 1,000 people. It is a very, very small community. And I have to say that I have felt this bias myself. When I first arrived in Oslo, I was invited to dinner by a colleague at the embassy. She'd also invited a wealthy landlord of hers who happened to be a businessman, and we sat down. But before he said hello, before he said welcome to Norway, or even said hi, my name is, he said to me, quote, "It is very strange that I know you are a Jew." I've also been the subject of discriminatory comments at the office. Even as an ambassador, people felt it okay to tell a joke in front of me and the entire embassy team that ended with a punchline that said, and I'm quoting, "And the cheap Jew bent over to pick the dollar off the floor." So you see, diplomacy does not give you immunity from discrimination. But what it does do, it gives you a platform to speak out against it. Now, I do need to say that the government of Norway has actually been fantastic on this issue. The Norwegian government has invested a lot in a specific strategy to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. But the fact that it needs to have a formal plan that aims to address discrimination for a community that's about 1,000 people strong talks about some of the challenges that they are facing. In addition to being Canada's ambassador to Norway, I'm also Canada's head of delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, for IRA. IRA is a small international organization that is dedicated to support Holocaust education, remembrance, and research. It has played a key role in raising awareness of the Holocaust globally and has helped us spread the lessons as a means to address contemporary forms of racism, xenophobia, and hate. Canada is one of 31 member countries whose experts meet regularly to advance the objectives of the organization. IRA is an important platform that helps us speak out before volatile situations degenerate to large-scale violence or even genocide. Lessons that we draw personally as diplomats are also important. And I have to say that I draw inspiration from the righteous among the nations, a group of people who have been identified and designated by Yad Vashem, Israel's National Holocaust Remembrance Museum, as having saved the lives of Jews during the Shoah. People like Raoul Wallenberg from Sweden, Konstantin Karadja from Romania, and Vladimir Vochoch from Czechoslovakia all used their diplomatic status to help save Jewish lives from the Nazi genocide. They used their offices to take action. They issued travel documents that protected Jews and helped provide safety in a time of horror. They did this at great personal risk to themselves. The personal consequences for them weren't, discipline or losing the job. It was life and death. Their decisions were existential in nature. The consequences of their actions were existential for the thousands of men, women, and children that they saved. Many Canadians know the story of Wallenberg, a man recognized as an honorary citizen of Canada for his heroism, how he saved lives through issuing Swedish travel documents and passports to Hungarian Jews. As Yad Vashem commemorates, in October of 1944, after the fascist Arrow Cross seized power in Hungary, Wallenberg was able to issue protective letters to thousands of Jews. Konstantin Karadja served as Romanian Consul General in Berlin until the end of 1941, and during this time he too issued passports to Romanian Jews living in Germany, and he refused to identify them by their ethnicity. That act, refusing to mark them as Jews on their passport, saved their lives. Vochoch was Czechoslovakia's consul in Marseille. He too issued passports to Jews to enable them to leave for overseas and escape Nazi atrocities. 3 men, 3 countries, all diplomats, all took action when it mattered most. The reason their actions matter, why remembering their actions matter, is because they force us to ask about ourselves. Would I do this when it mattered? Would I stand up when it mattered most? Would fear stand in the way of justice, or would it just be indifference? Now, we have to be cautious. We must not equate the depths of the genocide and mass murder committed by the Nazis and their accomplices with current human rights violations lightly. Too frequently, false equivalency is made between what are, without a doubt, gross violations of human rights, what is discriminatory and racist behavior, and the systematic, bureaucratic, industrial, planned mass murder of the Jews of Europe by the German Nazi machine, where the murder of every Jewish woman, man, and child was the objective, not a byproduct. The comparison also minimizes the murder, violence, and exploitation of millions of other victims of the Nazis: Roma, homosexuals, disabled persons, political prisoners, Soviet prisoners of war, Poles, Ukrainians, millions who did not fit with Nazi ideology. Hyperbole serves no justice. But knowing this history, understanding the spectrum of xenophobia, racism, misogyny, ableism, homophobia, anti-Semitism is essential to build a better future for all of us. As Canadians, there is a danger that we become complacent, or even worse, smug and superior about what we perceive to be our successful accommodation and integration of diversity. We too often forget our own journey as Canada to where we are today. We forget that we need to struggle with the demons of exclusion, bigotry, and hate every day. We forget that we need to stand together with communities and individuals that face barriers to their full participation in our society. We are too busy, we're too scared. It's someone else's fight. Well, the experience of my family, twice refugees because of violence and hate, my experience as someone who has faced discrimination himself, yet also someone who has been given the ability, the platform to speak out, compels me to do so. It motivates me to speak in Norway when I speak to indigenous Sami people who have a similar history of forced assimilation and loss of language as indigenous peoples had in Canada.
It compels me to write in support of Syrian refugees who deserve a chance to be productive citizens of Canada, just like I've been given a chance. I feel an obligation to use my voice. All of us have a voice. All of you have voices, and you have chosen to be here today to listen to those of us who have shared our experiences and views. You also have an opportunity to do something more, to be the voice that speaks out when you see someone being wronged. You have an opportunity to be the voice that counters a narrative aimed at stigmatizing an entire community. Whether it's Syrian refugees accused of being national security threats, or Chinese immigrants accused of being responsible for the housing and affordability challenges in this city, or Indigenous people stigmatized, people with disabilities marginalized. We all have the capability to stand together as human beings, trying to make ourselves, our families, our communities, and our country stronger. This is one of my favorite pictures. It was taken by the Cassini probe, and as you can see, it's the rings of Saturn. And I'm going to quote one of my favorite educators, Carl Sagan, because he used a similar picture like this about 25 years ago. And it's called the little blue dot. So I don't know if you can see the little blue dot. That's us. All of us. That's everything that has ever been. That's all nations, great and small. It's everyone you've ever loved. It's everyone who ever will love. It's the future, it's the past. We all share that, and we can't mess it up. We can't divide ourselves by things that are at the end of the day inconsequential and limit our capabilities to grow as human beings. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. I actually don't think we can take it for granted that it will. I think it needs a strong force to make sure that arc of history reaches its just destination. That gravitational force that is needed, it's you. It's people like you and me. That force is individual human beings who, through their conscious choices, can help improve the lives of our fellow human beings. I hope to make that choice every day because that's what it is. It's a choice. We choose to be respectful. We choose to be fair. We choose to be inclusive. Exclusion and hate are not innate. Today, we made a choice to seek a better Canada, one with room for all of its peoples. Today, you made a choice to be here with us, to lend your voice and show your support for the Canada that has welcomed me and many of you. Thank you for exercising that choice. I hope we can continue to do it together. Thank you.